Hi, welcome back. This is the second part of the holistic human. Here I am again. From now on, I'm going to move on more to the mind-body concept. But first of all, I would like to say something about genetics. This is my image of the sea, and within the sea, under the water, we have all our hidden attributes and an environment that we don't really see. Up in the sky, that is where we see symptoms, we see disease processes, and we have our conscious living. Below the surface, we have genetics, the microbiome, and anxiety. And I don't want to say very much about genetics because this is now moving on to mind-body. But I would like to just say something about the importance that it is paramount. And there is always a genetic component to just about everything. And what COVID has brought up is that there's more to genetics than we might imagine. And I'm giving you here an example of the glucose 6-phosphate dehydrogenase deficiency gene. This is the one which is associated with people who come from countries where malaria is endemic. And you'll notice that malaria is endemic in people who we describe as being black, Asian, minority, ethnic. And this is common. It's associated with antimalarial treatments, and the gene is a mutation. It occurs in those people who are not fortunate enough to have 2 X chromosomes, and therefore it has a preponderance for men. It's common. There are 400 million people with this gene deficiency, and it causes hemolysis, and its trigger can be certain drugs, antimalarial drugs, and also stress from viral and bacterial infection that act as triggers. So it's something where somebody should be paying some attention, in my view, to why black, Asian, minority ethnic people exposed to COVID seem to be very difficult to treat if they start getting lung problems. Because the dehydrogenase deficiency gene is associated with the oxygen carrying capacity. And it doesn't matter how much you ventilate people, if their red blood cells are being damaged and they can't function properly, then the treatment will fail. Epstein-Barr virus, if you're British and you're white Caucasian, you will probably get glandular fever. But if you come from northern China or certain parts of Asia, you may well get carcinoma of the nasopharynx. So genetics is absolutely paramount, and it differs. So I want to just throw that in, that these are big examples of why genetics is important. It's a subject we should take a lot of interest in, and it goes together with the microbiome and then the mind-body concept, and in particular I'm going to start talking about anxiety. So, mind-body wise, bit like the microbiome, the human cells, the percentage of the brain associated with conscious activity is only 20%. 8% of it is subsurface and is described as subconscious, and I've divided the subconscious into different layers, which are also intimately connected, and some are more accessible than others. So within the conscious, this is what appears above the water that we can see. Below we have the autonomic nervous system, the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. And of course the sympathetic is associated with stress and is actually not terribly sympathetic. The parasympathetic is associated with the relaxations. So if we throw all this together with genetics, the microbiome and the anxiety, then also below the surface we've got inflammatory processes, metabolic dysfunctions, immune system impairments, and hormone imbalance. And it's this mix of factors which leads to the results that we see in the sky and to the symptoms that we might see. From a psychological point of view, if we split up back into the conscious and the subconscious, below the surface we have our thinking, feeling, emotions, and way down, right at the bottom, is the physiology. So the subconscious is responsible for our thinking, feeling, and emotion, but it is all ultimately driven by the physiology. So if we can get to the physiology and we can control the physiology, then maybe we can start to control the thinking, the feeling, and the emotions, and we can get those connections opened up. And that is the aim of the use of the holistic scientific approach and with the use of hypnosis. So here in the sky you'll see the conditions that we get, the cardiovascular disease, everything, pretty well everything. Now also into the mix we can throw things like caffeine, stress, alcohol, medications, and I put those in the shallows because we can see those through the water. Deeper down in the sea, we find it difficult to see what's going on. But as it mixes up, it all starts to become a problem. And as it becomes a problem, like our environment, we will start to see problems arising above the water. I just want to say one or two things, again as background, just about the heart, and in my case, my extraordinary heart. So I'm the best part of 70 years old, which means that my heart has beat about 2.5 billion times. Now, that is some machine, isn't it? Goodness me. If you could make something like that, you'd be on a winner. So it's very powerful, this concept of grabbing a tennis ball and squeezing it tightly. It's doing an enormous amount of work, so the power generation is absolutely amazing. It doesn't just beat, it's not just a pump. It's a very, very good pump, and it pumps blood all the way around the body, and it pumps an enormous volume very quickly. I mean, 5 litres a minute is absolutely amazing. But it's also got connections to a neural network, to the brain, it creates hormones, and it's doing it 24 hours a day, 365 days a year. But not only does it do that, it's also a power generator. It generates between 1 and 5 watts of power, and it produces a magnetic field, which is what we do when we do ECGs. We take advantage of that. But that magnetic field is 5,000 times stronger than the magnetic field of the brain. And the magnetic field of the heart can be detected and measured several feet away from the body in all directions. Not only that, and unbelievably important, is that magnetic field is not only detected in the brain waves of other people in close proximity, but also in those people you can have measurable physiological effects on them. Now, that is amazing. And so, if you are hoping to have a physiological effect on somebody, you need to have a powerful magnetic field, but it would help if you were quite close to them. I'm talking proximity, not emotionally. Here's a diagram to try and explain what I mean. If you have somebody with a positive emotional state, and you'll hopefully be able to think of somebody or a situation where you look at somebody and you think, oh wow, they're really charismatic, or gosh, how impressive, they're really calm, they're really confident. A positive emotional state has a different magnetic field to somebody in a negative emotional state. Now, in the negative emotional state, you will probably be able to think of somebody that you can recognize that is very often in a negative emotional state, and their magnetic field is all over the place. And somehow you detect it. Probably a different subject, but nevertheless it's important. So it produces magnetic fields, but hypnosis originally came and was born out of Mesmer and his concept of animal magnetism. And isn't it amazing that now we're coming back to the concept of magnetism? Because Stanford University have been doing some experiments, not recently, quite a long time ago now, taking people in hypnosis, producing hypnoanalgesia, but then enhancing it by subjecting that area of the brain, which they can see on their MRI scans, and subjecting it to magnetism, and they are enhancing the effects, the analgesic effects. So that's amazing. We're back to magnetism. But it's suggesting that there's a lot more research to go into this area. So we've long believed that the mind and body are linked, and that there's this term now, body-mind or mind-body, and that the body is just a physical space and mind. But that's 1997. And I want to just say something else now about breathing, because the quickest way to stabilize our physiology is to control our breathing. And that's one of the reasons why breathing is important in meditation, yoga, and hypnosis. Again, part of that is the physiology. When we control our breathing and we breathe, we get rid of a lot of the negative emotion, the cortisol, and we produce a positive emotion, and we release DHEA, which is dehydroepiandrosterone, and there's about 27 of them. And this allows us some self-control in highly charged situations. It prevents the brain from shutting down, and it enables us to think clearly and become more perceptive. And so that's one of the reasons why, if you have a receptionist, the first thing that you tell her in your training, or perhaps the first thing that we tell them in their training, is when the phone rings, you take a deep breath in, smile, because you can hear you smiling, smile, and then answer the phone. And what that deep breath in does is that it gives you control. The smiling, they will be able to detect in your voice, and off you go. It doesn't then matter what they're going to say. They might be about to make a complaint, but because you've taken that deep breath in, you've given yourself a fighting chance of being on top. So, last word here on this sort of thing about performance drivers. You see people in the park driving people with ever increasing amounts of adrenaline, shouting at them, do this, perform well. This in fact is a fallacy. The real performance drivers are on the horizontal, moving from cortisol to DHEA. And DHEA, incidentally, is so powerful that it's banned as a substance in the Olympic Games because of its performance-enhancing capabilities. So if you think of Usain Bolt breaking world records, he did that by running his races at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And what he did before, he didn't psych himself up, he had a sleep. And when he wakes up, he moves himself into that zone where he is passionate, enthusiastic and motivated. And he wants to have adrenaline because he wants to run. He doesn't want to fight. He doesn't want his muscles to tie up with adrenaline, with noradrenaline. He wants the adrenaline, he wants the DHEA, and you watch him. He runs with a smile on his face. And that's because he's on the top left-hand corner of this performance driver. You'll notice that people on the bottom right, these are the people who eventually become suicidal. So for most of us, we swing. But if you're in negative emotion and you start releasing adrenaline, that's when you get angry, frustrated, anxious, and things go wrong. So we'll be alluding to these things during the course of looking at the holistic scientific approach when we start looking at treatments. So, in the meantime, just a reminder of how the presentations are arranged, and there's about 7 or 8 more which I'll put on after the last one. I suggest you do them in order because there's a certain logicality to it, but you can of course just jump around if you wish. Thank you very much for listening.